Hey everyone, welcome back. I've got a Lavos build for you today. I actually love his new augments so much. I've already enjoyed his base kit as I have a soft spot for MMO style gameplay. I understand his original rotations and capabilities may have felt lackluster for a lot of other players, but his new augment changes everything. Swift Bite, the second of the new augments released with the Primed Resurgence mainline. The other augments are Champion's Blessing, an amazing augment for Trinity, which I covered earlier this week and you can check out at the card above, and the two Zaku augments, the Relentless Lost and Vampiric Grasp, which I will cover in later videos. So why am I so excited about Swift Bite? Well, there are one, or maybe a few videos of Swift Bite floating around over the last few days from some other people that are saying this augment is trash and a band-aid mod. You do not need the mecha set and a Kubro for Lavos to work. There are two misconceptions about Lavos and this augment. The first is that this is just a budget transmutation probe. That is not true. The most important distinction about Swift Bite is that it can reduce its own cooldown. Transmutation probe cannot. The cooldown transmutation probe applies is passed on to your 1, 2, and 4, but his 3 gets stuck with a 10-second cooldown no matter what that you can't do anything about. This is where Swift Bite comes in. Not only does Swift Bite gives you health regen, a ton of it by the way, which is useless for endurance, but then again you can make Lavos tanky enough in base Steel Path that this is actually useful since it will be a key ability in his rotation. But it also reduces the cooldown of your transmutation probe, while also reducing its own cooldown. Now why is this important? Because with 175 efficiency, you can cut 7 seconds off Transmutation Probe's 10-second timer, which is a massive spear that procs whatever element you imbue it with, and also reduces the cooldown of your 4. This is also important because the more times you can spam Transmutation Probe, not only does your Catalyze Nuke come back faster, but you can also proc more status effects with that huge spherical AoE. Catalyze uses old condition overload scaling, means it gains 2 square damage for every status effect present on the enemy. So 2, then 4, then 8, 16, etc. This is why Catalyze is so lethal and why you see showcases of doing millions or hundreds of millions of damage despite having to chew through armor. Additionally, with increased spawn rates on Steel Path, it is very easy to hit 4 enemies at once with Swift Bite to trigger the augment effect. We are even pairing this with Magus Anomaly because hitting 4 enemies is our only goal. We do not need to Helminth on a grouping ability because like I said, we only need to hit 4 enemies with Swift Bite. The number of enemies on screen and in front of you is irrelevant for Catalyze. This is the second misconception about Lavos. You do not need a grouping Helminth on him, because your goal with Catalyze is not to kill the group of enemies in front of you. Your goal is to kill any enemies within your vicinity, through walls, behind objects, anywhere in the tile. You want to use Catalyze for the actual range it has. It has 25 meter base radius. Why would you use a grouping ability to shrink down the enemies towards the center, when you could just buff your damage other ways? To make the most out of Lavos' Catalyze, the best element has always been Gas. Why Gas? Because Catalyze has a force proc on cast and Gas has an AoE. The AoE from Gas can be scaled up with Sickening Pulse. Not only does this create persistent massive death clouds with a 6 meter AoE, but unlike normal Gas, this Gas scales. It also hits 10 times harder because that one stack becomes 10 with Sickening Pulse. Weapon modded Gas most limiting factor is that it cannot scale with mods. So you have to rely on Banes and headshot modifiers to make it stronger. But remember, Catalyze is different and has innate condition overload. This essentially is like a 100% Bane buff that dips for each extra status effect multiplicatively. So for a ticking dot, Gas is always the strongest option for Lavos on S4 because it solves the biggest problem of heat Catalyze. No AoE dot and no lasting effect beyond death. Gas Catalyze lengthens the effect of the ability by creating death clouds, which, by the way, are also affected by its duration stats. So if you build positive duration, these clouds will linger longer and carry the full effect of your Catalyze cast. You can then drag enemies in with Anomaly and they will still die without you having to cast Catalyze again immediately. The bonus? The gas clouds carry the condition overload scaling of the original enemy. So if you kill an enemy with Catalyze when they had 6 status effects, dragging a new enemy into the cloud will still make them take gas damage equivalent to the original enemy when they had 6 status effects, and not the 0 status effects the new enemy has. This helps your KPS while also trying to pull in enemies to trigger Swift Bite again, because like I said, you only need to tag 4 enemies to proc Swift Bite, which then cuts your trans probe cooldown and the vicious cycle repeats. Now how do we pick which ability to subsume Sickening Pulse over? You probably noticed I didn't mention Vile Rush. We don't need the cold element on it as we can proc viral with primers. We need our 1 and 3 for the positive feedback loop to reset his 4, so the choice is obvious. We also need his 1 to make gas for his 4, and the electric on his 3 also provides wide CC on the sphere it projects out. So let's piece together this monstrous Lavos build. This is what I have come up with. The first thing you might notice is I'm only running 160% efficiency, and also, wait, I'm actually building for efficiency? This is because 160 is more than enough, and I don't want to dedicate 2 Mon slots for 175. At 160, your 1 still reduces its own 8 seconds cooldown by 6.4 seconds, instead of 7, and this is why it's actually worth building efficiency on Lavos now. It also reduces the cooldown of your Transpro by 6.4 instead of 7. Whoop-de-doo. You will honestly not even notice a difference. If you want the Death Cloud to linger even longer, you can actually consider trying Streamline instead of Fleeting Expertise. This will cut the cooldown reductions on Swift Bite to just 5.2 seconds, but with how active the kit plays, you won't notice a massive difference. At 130% efficiency only, his probe still reduces cooldowns by about 2 seconds per enemy hit, so if you hit those same 4 enemies with your probe, it will instantly reset your Swift Bite even if you fail to hit 4 enemies with your 1. That's right. If you don't hit at least 4 enemies with your 1, the cooldown from Swift Bite Augment doesn't proc, but Transpro basically gives you a second chance on it. The simple rotation is, you cast your 1 after you catalyze, then you cast your 3, then you cast your 1 if you really do need it again, otherwise imbue your 4 with gas by holding your 1 and 4, and then cast your Nuke. Then the cycle repeats. I've opted for Natural Talent because of how spammy this build is. You will definitely notice cast times. His 4 is also noticeably slower of a cast than his other abilities, so this helps to make the build flow a lot better. We do not have proper shield gating regen on Lavos since he does not use energy, therefore Brief Respite and the Augur set bonus don't work on him. So for base steel path, I have slotted Adaptation, which pairs with Arcane Ultimatum well. The 1200 extra armor on top of his base gives him 86.2% damage reduction, which stacks multiplicatively with Adaptation. If you're going endless, I would recommend slotting Rolling Guard instead, since no amount of damage reduction will save you there for health tanking. Prime Sure-Footed because you definitely don't want to get knocked down on a frame that lacks proper shield gating, but also because we're using Epitaph today. I built for range but without overextended, since strength, while not being the main stat, is still important on the build. That's why I've supplemented it with Umbral Intensify, as you want to stay on the positive side. You want to stay neutral or positive duration as well on Lavos because that is his base status duration. It affects both your weapons and abilities, so if you go negative, all your status effects will last shorter than normal. Another thing about Sickening Pulse is you don't want to cast it twice in a row on the same enemies after nuking with Catalyze. It will set the gas dots to 1 damage. It has to do with how it inherits base damage used to inflict the gas dot, and how gas dots inflicted by Sickening Pulse have a base damage of 1. You can only scale Sickening Pulse gas procs off of other weapons and abilities, not itself. Yes, I know this is different from Heat Inherit, but this is just the way gas procs work. Our final arcane is Arcane Eruption, since you will be making plenty of energy orbs through how often you cast your 3. Universal orbs will trigger it, and you bet you will be spamming your probe, because of how often your 1 will reset it, while also being a core part of inflicting status effects before nuking with Catalyze. This also synergizes really well with your Panzer, which I'll get into later. Growing power for a little extra strength, since inflicting statuses is Lavos' entire shtick, so we basically have 100% uptime on the aura. Our primer, Epitaph today. This is what it looks like. Spam it however you want. This is a generic viral radiation epitaph. Normally I'd run Augur Pact over Prime Fulmination because of shield gating Augur set bonus, but that doesn't work on Lavos. Augur Seeker still provides extra status duration though, so I'm using it. The extra radius is actually useful in Lavos because Catalyze actually has enough range to make use of Epitaph's boosted AoE, while some other builds, like the GAUSS mock crash one I made yesterday, can't. This primer inflicts viral, radiation, blast, and force procs cold on every shot. The cold is perfect because it makes up for not having Vile Rush on the build to proc it, so you get 4 elements from spamming Epitaph, Toxin from Swift Bite, and Electric from Transprobe. There are ways to get even more, say if you brought a Primer Cedo, but this is just the basic spammy build I'm going with to show you today. 6 status effects present makes Catalyze do 64 times more damage. The Panzer we're bringing will also help to push those viral stacks further. Cedo, on the other hand, if you do bring it, could easily push this to 9, which brings us to 512 times damage multiplier, so feel free to bring that if you wish. You would mod it for Gas and Magnetic, which are the 2 missing elements. We're also missing Corrosive, but Gas and Magnetic are the only 2 that can be modded together on a Cedo. Our melee today is a stock Vastilock to armor strip acolytes. You don't actually need to do this because the gas actually hits hard enough it can kill them through their armor, but if you do want to armor strip them to guarantee they die faster, say in 1 or 2 ticks, this is an option. It only takes 3 shots from your Vastilock to full strip them, and because the first attack of High Noon hits twice, you only have to tap E twice to get that sweet red HP bar. The only important mods on the builds are Prime Fury and Shattering Impact. The rest of the mods are just fluff, though Lasting Sting can be handy if you want to bet on status effects you proc while stripping. I've chosen Neramon for executing dash, which opens up enemies to finishers. This will be our way to fuel Arcane Ultimatum reliably for 45 seconds of an extra 1200 armor at 100% proc chance. This is much less useful for endurance though, so you can use whatever you want for that. The pet is whatever. Like I said, I'm bringing the Panzer just for the viral proc consistency and infinite lives. There is an extra synergy though, but it is functional on a generic Panzer build. You have your viral for spores, martyr to save your ass, since Lavos doesn't have good shield gating, so this will probably trigger more than you think. Panzer Devolution for infinite lives, and Tech Assault to dodge fatal hits. The synth set bonus is useful if you're using weapons on the build that require the magazine, such as Nuke. While we don't have equilibrium synergy this time since Lavos doesn't use energy, the synth mods themselves are still important. Synth Deconstruct will still proc more health orb spawns from Viral Quill AoE assists, and Synth Fiber lets you always pick up health orbs. Additionally, Lavos Transmutation Probe converts all orbs into universal orbs, and these orbs carry the characteristics of both health and energy orbs, meaning Synth Fiber will let you pick them up even at full HP. But then it is also considered an energy orb, and will thus trigger Arcane Eruption to knock enemies down in a 30-meter radius, and this arcane has no cooldown on procs unlike Energize, so just a ton of synergy and potential for CC there if you want to use it, besides using Epitaph to primer with radiation and cold in large AoEs. And there you go, the Swift Nuke Lavos. As you can see, his new augment actually does make a massive difference, and you can still make the build feel good to use. Now, Lavos can truly actually nuke consistently without the help of others and make the most of his kit. I'd even go as far to say this mod is basically mandatory on any Catalyze focused Lavos build. The remaining footage is of Steel Path if you want to see more of the build in action. I used to enjoy playing Lavos and breaking him out from time to time, but this definitely will make me pick him up more often now. If this is your first time watching, feel free to leave a like, or better yet subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. 79.5% of you are not subscribed. I'm trying my best to get you new information out always as soon as possible, like I've done with covering the Sisters of Parvos and Plague Star updates. Stick around if you want to see interesting memes and builds on a nearly daily basis. I'm also preparing to get you the info first once more new war info drops. You don't want to miss out on any of that, do you? That'll be it for this video. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next time.